Eden Koz here with Just Be, and we are about to take a spiritual boom. We are at an unprecedented time in human history where we are transitioning from 3D to 5D within the great spiritual awakening. This video and audio podcast is the place for you to find your truth beyond politics, your sovereignty, your voice. Let's kick up your vibration now. By the way, each episode ends with the Just Be practice to do just that. And as we begin the show, just to know a little bit more about me, I'm a soul realignment specialist, meditation master, and dimensional healer. Learn more, and there's merch also at EdenJustBe.com. Let's get this party started. Eden, Just Be Spiritual Boom in association with the Grassroots Warriors Network. Welcome, Liev. And I said I'm probably going to mispronounce your name at some point. Did I say it correctly at that point?
You did it wonderfully. Yes.
Thank you so much. All right. So you're in Canada. We got a lot to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Liev knows I'm going to talk a little bit before we begin. All right. Mm-hmm. For those listeners, watchers, you know this is a very spiritually based show. So I've been doing this for three and a half plus years since January of 2022. Okay, we talk about the shift from 3D to 5D, the Great Awakening to the Matrix of Untruths. Yet I desire diversity of voices on the show, different thoughts, different actions. And as y'all know, I proclaimed a couple weeks ago that my real intention is to get younger folks on the show. Okay, and there's a reason for this. I want you to talk about this a little bit. I feel that your generation, can you tell us how old you are?
I'm 25.
25. Okay. And this is good because we are video and audio as well.
Perfect.
That your generation has, I feel, been the biggest that has been pummeled by programming and ideology from growing up with social media and, well, not completely growing up, but phones and entertainment and technology, that your ages have been beaten down because I don't plan on this, but a lot of people on my show are typically in their 50s or older, maybe 40s. So I love having younger voices because y'all are caught up to me in this intentionalized perfect storm. Okay, so to bring it up, so Victoria was on the show recently. She was a spiritual teacher who was in a transgender relationship, yet she explains it from a very awake, not awoke perspective. So, and pretty controversial, which I love that. And then Eric, who's a privacy expert with Privacy Academy. He was on the show recently. He's 26. And I've had some younger ones filtered in and out when I find people. And I wanted to ask you, Liev, have you seen, like, Charlie Kirk? I'm still discerning about a little bit, but I love him being on American college campuses and talking to folks and waking up the younger generation. Have you seen any of that by chance?
Yeah, I'm familiar with kind of the way that he goes and interacts with those individuals, the college students. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of that?
I mean, it's the way they do it. Like what I do really appreciate about that is he does give people a voice. He does give people a reason to come and share their thoughts and to think critically. And I think that's one of the things that is mostly lacking, especially on college campuses and universities. There is no freedom of expression or freedom of thought even. All we're taught is regurgitation, and that's really from the day we enter in the
Yeah.
public schooling systems. You're supposed to memorize things and then regurgitate that information onto a test, and you're tested based on your memory rather than your critical thinking ability, or your ability to come up with ideas, or even just hash out ideas, not necessarily come to the correct conclusions all the time, but even the process of which you go about working through these ideas. So yeah, I think that's a valuable way to stimulate discussion among the younger people. And you're seeing a shift. People are very passionate about things, whether it's the right things or the wrong things. I mean, first of all, who are we to necessarily say? But at least there's an increase in passion about
Yes.
thinking, I guess.
Yes. And I know we're going to talk about this in a moment because one of the first, I'm going to read your bio in a second. One of the first questions I'm going to ask you was about you seeing the untruths, and you were in university at that time. You, from the shows that I've watched, and even just now, are very articulate. Okay, I'm going to think about this for a moment, how to phrase it. For such a young person and person who is, let's say, young in your experience, I guess, for a lack of a better way of saying it, have you always been this way?
Well, I think my dad would probably say that, like, I am. He always said that he could never win a debate with me from, as soon as I could start talking. So, I mean, maybe that's always been part of me, but yeah, I've just had a yearning for learning as much as I possibly can, and that's just been really important to me. And I mean, to be able to articulate yourself properly is really important as well. So it's things that I focused on for sure.
Okay, that's really great. All right, let me read a little about a bit
Sure.
a bit. See how articulate I am at this point. A little bit about you before we continue. Okay, so Liev Dalton is the creator and host of Beyond Terrain, and we'll talk more about that. An ecosystem exploring the deeper roots of health, biology, and human potential through a terrain-based lens. With a background in biochemistry and molecular biology and a passion for critical thinking, which you've talked about, he challenges modern scientific dogma and offers a radically different perspective, which I do too, one rooted in true empirical observation, logic, ancestral wisdom, and personal responsibility. Heck yeah. From microbiology myths to spiritual health, Beyond Terrain pulls apart the mainstream narrative and builds a more coherent, grounded framework for life and healing. What started as a podcast is now evolving into a movement, a space for people questioning the system, simplifying their lives, and reclaiming their sovereignty together. It's very well written. Okay, talk about when you were in school, that was kind of your aha moment that
Mm.
something ain't quite right. And I loved one podcast that I watched there where someone described something and you came back saying, you're wrong. And then you realized that he was actually correct.
Yeah.
And I think that was the point that really had your mind go, oh my gosh, there's something different here. So if you can talk through that versus me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So like you mentioned, I did my undergraduate degree in biochemistry and molecular biology.
Mhm.
I wanted to be a dental surgeon. That was my goal. I was definitely in it for the wrong reasons.
Okay, can I stop you on that for a second?
Yeah.
I'm also learning that dentistry is so that it is also full of falsehoods.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
And we
Woo!
can touch on that a lot. I just did a master class last week on how to heal your teeth naturally, and we talked a lot
Oh,
about dentistry.
let's do. I'll
Um,
put a note.
yeah, even the kind of alternative space in dentistry too can be quite problematic too. So there's lots to consider there. But
Okay.
um, anyways, yes. So I was doing my undergrad. I was about halfway through, just finishing up my second year, and that's when all the sort of COVID things came around, the lockdowns. So I had a lot of time to spend with myself, with my thoughts. I worked. I was fishing lobster actually in PEI where I'm from, and so it's quite a tiring job. You wake up at 3 in the morning and you fish until 1 or 2 in the afternoon,
Oh
and
my
so
God.
you're
So
just wiped.
PEI is Prince Edward Island.
Yes, yes, you
Okay.
got it. Yeah. Small little island on the east coast of Canada, very small town, community focused, really nice place to grow up. But yeah, I had a lot of time in my hands. I was browsing around on YouTube or something like that, and I was watching these videos on, the whole lab leak hypothesis that was being pushed out because I just wasn't satisfied with the way that the whole COVID fiasco was playing out. And so within that, I was like, oh yeah, like there's got to be something more to this. So I first went down the lab leak thing, and then I kind of get into these videos on why germ theory is nonsense and why it cannot exist, So I went down into the comments of this video, and it was Dr. Andrew Kaufman, one of his videos, and I was like, you don't understand. Like, I study molecular biology and biochemistry. We know these molecular pathways of how bacteria interact with, our immune system and why they do cause disease. And he just very simply and calmly sent me some more resources to look into. And so, curiosity got the best of me, and I looked into it a little bit further and wasn't convinced initially, but
Yeah.
that there was a certain amount of emotional involvement that I had in that because I've never went down into the comments section and wrote a comment like that before. So there was a reason that happened that way. I felt compelled to do it, and but I wasn't convinced, So I woke up every single day for like the next, 6 to 8 months, and I tried to disprove this whole terrain theory idea and prove the germ theory correct. So I went and read the original papers, Koch's postulate papers, Louis Pasteur's papers, Edward Jenner, all of the original germ theorists. And the more that I looked at the original data and research, the more I realized that actually, okay, germ theory has been falsified if we're, adhere to empirical principles in the scientific method, and the terrain is at the basis. It's the true fundamental way to explain out health, wellness, biology, and beyond, right? So a little hint there why it's called Beyond Terrain, my platform, So
Awesome.
yeah.
So okay, so 6 to 8 months, because it's like for me, I was, let's say, spiritually awake, but then COVID happened, and that awakened me to the truths, the untruths of our world. And it was interesting for me because they were documentaries that took me to one and then took me to the other, where yours was really study,
Hmm.
like hard reading these theories and reading these papers and just diving deep into that. Were you at the time, did you feel like you were kind of alone in that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the main things on like that I felt during my journey. I was like, would always say that I'm like this outcast, this black sheep, even like if within my academic circles, when I tried to discuss these
Oh
ideas,
man.
within academia, which I really thought that that was the whole idea of universities was to
Yeah.
develop ideas and to, move science forward. I would discuss it with my peers and my professors, and I just received total illogical criticism, attack on myself, ad hominem arguments, telling me that I'm some sort of conspiracy theorist or whatever. When I was looking at the papers themselves and asking people's opinions on scientific papers, and so I wasn't met with anything academic in return. I was met with, criticism and illogical arguments and just kind of ignoring actual evidence that was out there. So I had a real problem with that, and that was difficult
Yeah.
within kind of the academic side of things. But then, I encountered, other people's works, and Rupert Sheldrake's work, his work on, his thoughts on academia has really helped me along. And then just finding, your people and your tribe. And I have a really solid core friend group that doesn't matter how crazy I am, they'll listen to me. And a lot of them kind of agree or, in a way, or whatever. So I have a really solid friend group where we're not afraid to kind of push the norms and not necessarily just adhere to what we're being told. So, yeah, I mean, you certainly do feel alone, but my family was great, and my now wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, has always been
Yeah.
very supportive of me on that journey, and that really helped me along too. And so,
That
yeah,
is
you
really
gotta kind of
great.
find, yeah, yeah.
So your family believed in what you thought, or just were supportive of you, even though their beliefs were okay, you're laughing a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah. I mean, yeah, like kind of, and so like they don't necessarily believe everything that I do, but they're very supportive of me being my own person, and they always have been. And I think that's one of the most helpful things that they've ever done. And my upbringing, they really wanted me to develop into my own being. They weren't trying to make me into
Wow.
someone that they wanted me to be. Like they just let me really, um, throw these ideas out. And when I did want to go public and start discussing these ideas publicly at the podcast, YouTube, stuff like that, they're always very supportive, and they watch all the videos and the podcasts and stuff like that. So, yeah, even though, there's probably lots of things we still disagree on, we don't let that kind of come between us either, right? Like there's not really a point in that. I think you got to kind of live and let live a little bit too. So that's a big part of my philosophy.
Okay, but that is so great because COVID disagreements drove families apart, put wedges. Like for me, being the spiritual worker that I am, that always was kind of like, okay, you pat me on the head, you do your own little thing. But then when I really started, disagreeing with things, I mean, I clients shut me down. Everything was shut down. So I
Mhm.
I had a core group, my parents, my family. I was at January 6th in DC. So then my own parents were like, "Are you a what's it called? I'm totally forgetting. What is it? Not a conspiracy theorist, but where you're hurting America. Whatever
Oh,
that. Come on, what's that term? I totally can't remember it. Where yeah, you're just influencing, you're coming, you're bad in America, whatever. So my parents
sure.
asked me
Yeah.
if I was that. So you are probably one of the very few people that I've had on the show that even though, because this is to me what this awakening is about, is you have your thoughts and I can have mine, and we can, that's what makes living on earth fabulous. So I'm so excited to hear that. I'm so excited to hear that they watch all your shows as well. So how, when you were met with other people in your class and teachers dismissing you and calling you a conspiracy theorist, how did you handle that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in the moment, you're big and tough and you brush it off, and, you don't really realize how these things affect you on a deeper level, so there was a certain amount that you kind of do suppress in the moment to keep moving forward, and, um, but, working through that, in the following years and just doing lots of reflection, that was really
Yeah.
something that was important for me, to
Okay.
make sure that these things aren't getting suppressed and then repressed into the body and the psyche. So there was a certain amount of work there, but, I remember distinctly this one time I was looking into the PCR tests quite in depth, and obviously I studied molecular biology, so we know the ins and outs down into the molecular basis of how PCR works. Like I'm not, I'm very well versed in the function and exactly what you're looking at in the softwares. We ran these things. So I was discussing with my professor, in a lecture, it was very clear. She was lecturing us on PCR, kind of introducing the concept. This was when I was in uh, third year. So we knew about it, but she was kind of introducing, it was at the start of the year, and she mentioned a cycle threshold count of 33 and above would never be accepted in a scientific paper. And so I just raised my hand and I said, well, why does this CDC document say that laboratories should run it at 40 cycles? And, she was like, oh, well, that's a fake document. And I was like, well, I just got it off the CDC website. I mean, you can go and find the link yourself. I'll send you the link. It's on the government website, 40
Mm-hmm.
cycles. I'm like, why are we running tests at 40 cycles if anything over 33 should not be accepted in a paper? And it was just, you're some sort of this, that's false, that's not true. Wouldn't even look at the document. I could not get her to go to the CDC website and open that document. She would not, she was refusing completely to look. I mean, it was like the least confrontational way that I could go about it on my part. I thought because I
Yeah.
simply just asked the question and I had the document and the link and the source, and it wasn't even from my people. It was from sort of the central government agencies that were regulating it. So there was just a total lack of open-mindedness there. And how did I feel in that moment? I mean, I just kind of felt grateful. I was like, I'm glad even though I was completely on the other side, totally engulfed by this whole modern science, um, but I was able to be open-minded enough to go and look. And so if she opened up that document and said, you know what, they are running it at 40 cycles, but this reason is why they do that, but she at least went to go look and considered it. There'd be a certain extra level of open-mindedness there that she didn't have, and that fortunately I did. So I did feel a lot of gratitude for that. Just that I had the ability to go and look. I wasn't afraid to have my
Yeah.
ego shattered or whatever it was, however you want to describe it. I was able to say, yeah, I was wrong about this, and so I can accept that. It's not a big deal. Like it doesn't mean anything about me as a person, but 30, 40 years in the field of genomics, she obviously had a lot of connections there. If she started talking about how PCR was being falsely used, she probably would have lost her tenure, lost her job, lost her livelihood. Who knows what happened in the family life? There's a lot of things that are attached to that, but
Yeah.
so I understand that at the same time. But was my journey, I suppose. So I was kind of grateful in that moment. That's one that really sticks out to me.
Sticks out to you. And she's probably looking at you going, you don't know what you're talking about, you young buck. Just sit down. Shoo. Good for you having the
Yeah.
guts to do that because all of this takes guts. You were in Nova Scotia at the time that this all
Yeah,
went
I went
down?
to Dalhousie University in
Okay.
Halifax.
Tell
Yeah.
me, because I talked to you about David, my friend who's also in Nova Scotia that's been on the show. He talked about living there and the fines and how long the lockdowns there lasted. What was the impact or your perception of that?
I mean, the impact for me, obviously there was no, it was kind of all happened really beautifully when I look back on it now. You know, it
Yeah.
was a time in my life where I needed to reflect and, go into nature more. So I was in nature every single day. And, I was living with my girlfriend, now my wife, and we lived in this tiny little apartment downtown. And then we moved in with family and we kind of just moved around and we were able to summer and work in PEI at my home. And, so it felt like for us, we were able to just continue on our journeys, which was very fortunate, as because we were both kind of slowing down and wanting to kind of shift from that, rah rah party culture, that I know a lot of young people missed, but for me, it was like a blessing. I'm like, God, I don't gotta go and do all this stuff anymore, and I got a pretty good excuse. So I was able to kind of go and do that internal work that needed to be done, which was kind of nice on my journey, on my path when I look back on it. For me, the biggest kind of impacts was just kind of with the people. I'd go to the grocery store and I wouldn't, wear the mask, and people would, say things to you and they'd want to have a confrontation, an argument. And there were a few times where I'd be messing with people and I'd be like, "Oh, like what do you mean? Like there's a virus? What are you talking
No.
about?" And I'd pretend I didn't know anything about it.
That is so clever. That is so clever. I love that.
So I had a little bit of fun, but there were a couple times where like, I just wouldn't be in the mood and I'd be in a bad mood and someone would tell me to put a mask on and I'd tell them to screw off and mind your own business. And that those things, all contributed to my own development too, because I realized that wasn't the way to go about it. I didn't increase the good in the world through that interaction. At least when I was messing with people, I was having a little bit of fun and trying to make them like laugh and smile, and
Yeah.
like bring their worries down, so um, I kind of developed that way too. And then eventually just smiling and being like, yeah, like I'm good, like I'm all right, you know, thanks for letting me know. Like, thank you for telling me, rather than that hostility, I met it with like just love and gratitude. And that was one of the kind of overt things that I did to develop, just to improve my interactions with people, because that was the hardest part, having negative interactions with people and then trying to bring it into positive ones, so. That was like a challenge. It was a big challenge to have positive interactions with people who come up to you with a great amount of hostility,
And fear.
and they think you're an idiot and they think whatever. But to transform one of those confrontations into, a kind of laughing something off, or, just kind of diffusing that, was helpful for that journey. So that was a big impact, because the people here, they were quite overtaken by the propaganda.
Hmm.
There were big fines, but it didn't really affect me, because I didn't consent to it. I didn't necessarily let that affect me, like it was like
Yeah.
the government could tell you what to do, but the government as an authority is a total falsehood, and authority in general doesn't exist except for kind of the greater authority of our realm, that higher power than us. Um, but any other authority is a total falsehood, except for maybe the authority of mom and dad when you're a developing, human or something like that. But even then, is authority the right way to look about it? Probably not. That's probably not the right word to use. I would say authority is always a falsehood. So, the government could try to tell you what to do, but I don't need a government to tell me what's right or wrong or good or bad. I can make those decisions on my own, because I have a really good connection with the creator, with a greater sense of just myself. I have a great sense of community and the people around me. So, yeah, that was sort of a difficult journey as well, to try to realize that, it doesn't matter what the government does. I can
Hmm.
still live my life and do the best things, like become the best version of myself. So, yeah, that was hard to swallow too, but yeah.
Okay, so that even with this authority, you found your own authority in that. And I like
Mhm.
you also saying nature is law. I want to speak to you about nature. And also, I know one of your questions that you ask on your show is what does health mean to you?
Yeah.
I want to go into all that. Can you start talking about it?
Sure, sure. So nature, I mean, um, when it comes to nature, natural or law, like I'm probably not the most well versed. I know there's some people who discuss this very much in depth and are quite familiar with philosophy. I mean, at the end of the day, like when it comes to health, um, you have to get back to what's innate, what our bodies know, and our bodies know nature. Um, that doesn't mean that everything in nature is necessarily good for you or healthy or good in general. Um, but it certainly does mean that everything that is natural is not foreign. So when we discuss, the true causes of disease, in the terrain paradigm, we generally say that there's only three classes, and they can really be summed up in two. But there are toxicities, and there are deficiencies, and then there are traumas, and that kind of impact that encompasses physical, spiritual, mental, psychological. Um, and those can be kind of categorized as either toxicity or deficiencies as well, but then I'm just kind of getting into concept formation and semantics and stuff like that. So less important. Um, Toxicities include anything that is synthetic. Anything that is synthetic is a toxicity. There's no way around it. It's not meant to instill fear. It's not meant to do any of that bad stuff. It's meant to acknowledge that anything that is synthetic is foreign to our bodies. Our bodies do not know how to handle it, how to deal with it, how to process it. And so it is a toxicity in any capacity. And as much good as coming from this conversation and connecting with other people over social media, it needs to be understood that these devices, the electromagnetic frequencies, um, there is a certain amount of toxicity that is attributed with these devices, even the off-gassing of the materials being used, the plastics, it's all synthetic, it's all foreign. Um, all that is natural in excess is also a toxicity. So you can eat too much of a certain food, you can drink too much water, you can get too much sunlight, you can get whatever. These are all realities, these are all toxicities, but they're because they are natural things in unnatural quantities, right? So heavy metals are natural and they are found in fish and spring waters and certain plants and herbs and teas and but the reality of the situation is that we have an unnatural amount of heavy metals in our environment now due to mining practices, due to our exhausts, planes, trains, cars, things that go, all release heavy metals because of they burn heavy metals and they aerosolize it. So we have unnatural amounts of natural things, and those constitute toxicities. Deficiencies is just the lack of something that we need, and
Hey,
this can
can I
be,
ask you real quick?
yeah.
Chemtrails. What do you think about chemtrails?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like the whole weather modification and different ideas like that, like I don't really know. That's not really my wheelhouse. But
Okay.
what I do understand is that planes release aluminum and barium and all these toxic
Hmm.
compounds from their exhausts, and they do rain down on us.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the realities. That's one of the toxicities in our environment. They've been trying to modify the weather since, pre-World War II. It's
Yeah.
not like an absurd idea. I mean, they do it in
Mm.
Dubai, admittedly, so why we think that they're not doing it here, I mean, it's kind of foolish to me.
Right.
But I don't really know too much in depth about that. But I do know that, you can't, there's no one in the world who can say that, what comes out of an exhaust isn't toxic.
Yeah.
It's just very simply very toxic compounds being aerosolized, so they go very easily into our bloodstream through our lungs. So, um, yeah, sorry, I'm a little long-winded here with this definition of health, but just to kind of cover the root causes and how the terrain paradigm sees it, deficiencies are just lacking things that we need. So, lacking vital nutrients, lacking love, nature, sunlight, even a certain amount of stress is natural, experiencing the elements, different stuff like that. Lacking, connection with community, eating with family, lacking dance and prayer and meditation and these things. I do think for the human being, these things are a necessity. They've been practiced by all indigenous cultures around the world ubiquitously. So they are a need for human beings. So traumas, physical traumas, you fall, you break your arm, that's kind of a dis-ease, right? Um, Same with psychological ones. This kind of gets into a more difficult way to discuss the impacts and the effects of what psychological traumas actually mean. But, to sum it up, you can take stress for an example. A certain amount of stress is necessary, and then there's an unnatural amount of stress. A certain amount of love is necessary, then there's an unnatural amount of love. There's a certain amount of neglect is necessary, then there's too much neglect. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that kind of where it comes in with the whole psychological side of things. But those are kind of generally the root causes of health, and they do always come back to nature. Nature really does give us the answers. It's what our bodies know. We should adhere to that, and the more nature we can get into our lives, the better. Um, and that's kind of like the whole terrain idea. We have an internal terrain and an external terrain, and our body is the internal terrain, and that reflects our external terrain. So if we're living in the modern environment and it's full of toxicities and deficiencies, our internal bodies will reflect that, and it will manifest with symptoms and problems and dis-ease, right? Because we're in harmony with our environment, but our environment is not in harmony with nature. So that's really fundamentally where the whole, we could certainly get into more ideas around why nature absolutely is the answer. Um, but that kind of sums it up fundamentally in the whole terrain idea. The terrain is everything. It's physical, it's
Yeah.
metaphysical, it's internal and our external. It is absolutely everything, and that's why the terrain philosophy carries so much weight because it's true holism. It doesn't ignore anything.
Nice.
Yeah, hopefully that kind of answered your question. But I do think, just to sum up, when it comes to health, it's very individual. It depends on who you are, what your goals are, what your values are. Uh, because anything that inhibits you from achieving your dreams and achieving you becoming the best version of yourself is unhealthy. Anything that inhibits that is unhealthy. And that is where disease comes when you cannot become the best version, the most whole version of yourself. It's because, we all start from different points. Like, if I was in a different environment, grew up differently, if I was you, I would be you, and if I was, some celebrity, I'd be some celebrity. We are products of our environment, and what we do engage with and interact with. So, um, you know, health is very individual and that journey looks different for everyone. If you're born without a left hand, you're not going to be the best left-handed baseball thrower in the world, right? So to
Hmm.
become the best version of yourself, you have to work within the framework of, your environment, who you are, where you want to get to. So, yeah, I think that's fundamentally how I usually like to kind of define health in a way.
That's very, like you said, very whole. I loved this one podcast you did with Wes, who's hopefully going to be on the show too, because there are so many people right now that pontificate, this is the way to eat, this is the way to eat nutritiously. And y'all also express, which I'll talk about me for just a second,
Mhm.
that nutrition and how you choose certain things that you eat is very personal because I agree with that. Am I'm not keto, but my diet is, when you look at it, pretty keto because I took out sugar probably 3 years ago because I knew sugar was not was I also feel like the dark forces or whatever, and this it's sugar's evil for lack of a
Mhm.
better way of saying it. I didn't drink much alcohol, yet I really got rid of that too because of a spiritual influence of that. And then I think because of the glyphosates and everything, I like grains don't sit well with me. So started pulling those out. Then I know you do a lot of raw milk. Pasteurized milk didn't fit. So a lot of dairy. And then organic foods just really felt good for me. So it wasn't like I pushed myself into this paradigm. It just naturally has evolved. So what for you in terms of eating and your diet, what works for you these days? What are
Mm.
you feeling?
I say you need to get to know your farmer. That's probably the easiest
Okay.
way to improve your diet is if you can't go to Superstore or Sobeys, what that you guys probably don't call them that
We
out your
don't.
way, but I think those are Atlantic Canadian chains. But if you can't go to the grocery store, what are you gonna eat?
Yeah.
Very simply, what are you gonna eat? Kind of answers the question really easily, and obviously our ecosystems have been, especially here, used to be able to walk across the river. There was so much salmon in the water. Or
Mm.
you could walk across the ocean. There was so much cod in the water.
Hmm.
But we sold our fisheries overseas and they fished it, almost out of existence. And, the populations are coming back. And I do think that if there's, maybe those governmental agencies like DFO do a reasonable job at keeping our waterways full of fish, and but at the same time, they put artificial fish out in lakes and stuff like that, and they spray glyphosate over national parks because there's pike, and Anyways, we won't get into that. But very simply, you get into connecting with your farmer, connecting with your food source. We go and we fish for a lot of our food. We eat striped bass and you can eat trout and we eat lots of the lobster and oysters and shellfish, seafood of all kinds, and I eat, what my farmer can provide. He provides me with eggs, milk, cheese, beef, pork, chicken, so that's what I eat, for the most part. Sometimes you go and you have an ice cream or you eat something bad, but you just got to connect with your food source. If you couldn't go to the grocery store, what would you eat? I think that answers the question so simply.
Yeah.
Now, is there a time and a place for importing food? Yeah, I mean, sometimes I eat fruit in the winter, which is not necessarily natural.
Yeah.
Um, like I like to drink smoothies. Like we freeze our fresh strawberries here in the summertime, and I'll, have strawberry milkshakes throughout the year. And um, is that going to be the one thing that harms your health completely? Like, not really. I mean, if you're trying to achieve a real purity, which can be necessary for a certain period of time when it comes to healing or cleanse, to try to introduce as pure of food, as natural food as possible, I think that can be beneficial for a time period. But if you don't want to talk sustainability, um, again, we're still connected with that food source. Like we still got the strawberries and we still freeze them, and so we're still connected in that way with our food system, right? So just connecting with your food, realizing what can you grow. Like we grow gardens in the summer and eat cucumbers and tomatoes and stuff like that. Are we going to die from oxalates and anti-nutrients and plants? That's going around a lot nowadays. I mean, I don't know. I'm not dead yet, and not overtly sick or anything like that. I feel pretty good. I perform really well. So I don't know. Connecting with your food, I think that's the number one thing that we got to do is just connect with the food, connect with the farmers and the fishermen, and go from there.
Awesome. And I will add into that too, the spiritual component of that is mindful eating and praying before you eat, how whatever your
Of course.
methodology or your spirituality is, that I feel also there's so much mind power in everything and in your well-being as well. So you add that
Agreed.
into that is really awesome. What was I going to ask you? Uh, oh yeah, I do want to talk about Step into the Woods that just happened with you guys last week. Can you explain what went down?
Yes, so the Nova Scotia government came out and they banned people from entering the woods, period. You're not
Okay.
allowed to go hiking, fishing, camping,
Okay. So,
ATVs.
okay, so let me preface we're recording this on August 19th,
Yes,
2025. It'll be live in 2 weeks. So, this probably by the time the show's aired, it'll have been a month or so
about a
since this
month.
happened. All right, so
Yes,
you being very into nature as well, and then the government basically saying you may not go into nature. All right,
yeah.
further explain that, please.
Yes. So the reason that the government said this is because it's been extremely dry here, and it has been very dry. There's no doubt about it. There's no green grass on PEI right now. There's no green grass in Nova Scotia. It is very dry. And their idea is that if we ban people from going in the woods, there will be no forest fires.
Oh my God.
Um, which, they've put this ban into effect. It's been, over a week now, almost 2 weeks, and there's a raging forest fire happening in Nova Scotia right now. It's like 2,000 hectares. So and there was two forest fires right close to my house when I was back in Nova Scotia last week. This was after the ban. Um, so it's not really working. It's kind of absurd. I mean, it's total government overreach. You could probably be a little bit more harsh and negative than that. Um, but the whole idea is, they're doing this in the name of our environment, to save our forests, etc. And I'm all for that. I am. This is just not the way to go about it because they've also lifted a 40-year ban on uranium mining in Nova Scotia. So they opened up bids for companies to come and mine uranium, which is an extremely toxic practice. It has about a 400-mile radius of toxicity that spreads when you mine uranium.
Wow.
They actually want to do it just down the road from the farm in which I get most of my food from.
Okay.
So the farmer's pretty ticked off about that. They want to sell it overseas, right? Let's sell all of our natural resources overseas. That's the classic Canadian move. We do it with our fisheries, we do it with our oil, we do it with our precious metals. We do it with everything. That's a classic Canadian move, to sell off our resources, because no one here knows how to mine uranium, of course. They also just passed, they're spraying glyphosate over the forests to combat
What?
pests that are coming about because of how dry things are, etc. And again, in the name of
Oh
saving our environments, they are quite
man.
literally spraying glyphosate from planes. This is not the first time this has happened. This has been happening for 10 years now. The oil companies, Irving, has been spraying glyphosate over Prince Edward Island, over Nova Scotia, over New Brunswick. All of the Maritimes are being sprayed. Like I said, they sprayed it over our national park, Kejimkujik, uh, to combat the pike that are in the water or something like that. I mean, it's not working. There's tons of pike still in the water, and they are, you know, killing everything else. But spraying glyphosate is not the answer. So it's like
Kills everything.
I'm all for protecting the environment. I love going in the woods and being in the woods. And, we were
Jeez.
impacted by a forest fire 2 years ago. There was a huge forest fire, wiped out 200 homes in my subdivision. I'm in the subdivision where half the homes are burnt. It was
Wow.
probably about 50 yards away from my house was the burn line. We were
Okay.
out of our house. We had tons of smoke damage. I mean, I'm not insensitive to
Yeah.
individuals who are impacted by these forest fires. Like, I completely agree, but then again, there's still forest fires going on and people are banned from going in the woods. I mean, it's absurd to say that a hiker is going to start a fire from walking their dog or going fishing, or even, they banned ATVs and the use of motors. Again, those are not the, majority that happens, rarely do those things start fires.
Hmm.
Last year there was a huge fire down the south shore of Nova Scotia. It was started by teenagers who are burning tires and throwing them in the woods.
Oh,
It's
geez.
like
Yeah.
it's not the your average hiker going in the woods. So total government overreach. I mean, it's nonsense. Now New Brunswick has taken it, another Eastern Canadian province. I'm pretty sure Newfoundland followed suit. $50,000 fines, $125,000 fines. Like in Nova Scotia, it's $25,000 um, if you go enter the woods. Simply put, you enter the woods, $25,000.
Wow.
I only know of one person who got the fine, and they went to the Department of Natural Resources and asked them to give him a fine so we can go and fight it in court. I don't know if anyone's actually gotten the fine otherwise, except for this one gentleman. He's like an ex-military vet, and he went and got the fine so he could take the government to court.
Okay.
Which good on him. Fully support that man.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, we've not been going in the woods. We listen to our government and our authority because that's what's right. So if anyone's wondering if
Okay.
I'm in the woods, the
Jeez.
answer is no.
So this has led you though to meet a whole bunch of people that are
Yes.
have a similar mindset to you. Can you talk about that? Which again,
Yeah.
it's so funny how the government tries to suppress things and it just open like with COVID, just opens the door to so much more. Yeah, talk it.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
awesome.
yeah, and it's like it's the double-edged sword, right? So like on one hand, they are creating division again. There's a certain group of people who are like, yeah, you're so stupid for going in the woods, you're so selfish, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Um, But like that's not really the majority of the reaction at this point, and you can kind of just sweep that stuff under the rug at this point. We've learned really good lessons from COVID and how to deal with these people and this stuff. Um, but like now I'm connecting with a lot of great people, social media again, kind of the beneficial side of it,
Wow.
connecting with a lot of like-minded people in the Maritimes themselves from making a few posts here and there. People reaching out saying, "Oh, I didn't know you were local, whatever. Oh, I just live down the street from you."
Oh my
Like we
God.
gotta, it's kind of funny. It's so small here, Anyone you meet, you can make a connection here in the Maritimes. So, which is kind of nice. So,
Yeah.
I'm making more and more connections with like-minded people, and generally the response is not, I have my cousins are firefighters and they're like, this is just absolute nonsense. And they're in the
Wow.
woods fighting the fire, like
Right.
straight up. They deal with the repercussions more so than anyone else.
Yeah.
And it's still that's generally understood. Even the firefighters, they're not necessarily speaking out, but they're not for these things either, right? Because they want to preserve the forests and protect the
Sure.
land and things like that. But they know that this is not the way to do it. So, but it's the same thing with COVID. They pushed the envelope a little bit too much, and then a bunch of people woke up, and a bunch of
Mhm.
people are aware, and they know what's going on, and they're not going to take part in this stuff anymore. So it's a little bit more difficult, to go and do this. Like people are still out and about. They're still going in the woods. There's a lot of people who aren't, but that's all right. I'd be really curious to know because there's a snitch line. There's like a
Oh
number
my
that you can
gosh.
call
Yes.
to tell
Oh
on people.
man.
I'd be really curious to know like how often people are calling that line. I think that would be really interesting because there's a few people that are, but I
Oh,
bet you it's not as high as you'd think.
oh my gosh. And how can they track all the wood? I'm like, is someone standing by every entryway into the, well, like, how is that even
Yeah, well,
possible?
I think that's why they got the snitch line, right? So you can
Oh,
call your neighbor to get them in trouble.
oh, that the snitch
Yeah.
line. All right. I thank you for sharing that. All right. I want to do a little bit of dentistry. We're getting ready to, I'm going to have you go into the practice in a moment, but this is kind of all related to that. So, two things that you have discovered through your process that just knocked your socks off, that you were just like, oh my gosh, like from PCR test to germ theory. Yeah. What are your top two at this point?
Mm. Two things that really knock my sock. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole germ theory itself is kind of like the big thing for me that I was like fighting initially. I was like, oh, this has to be correct. Germ theory has to be correct. Because that was certainly something that was like, wow, that's crazy. I can't believe that that is actually false. And now I'm like, you know, not 100, maybe 99.99999% sure that it's false, on every front when it comes to parasites, fungus,
Okay, so
germs.
explain that a little bit. What is germ theory?
Yeah. So, I mean, germ theory is the idea that germs themselves cause
Hmm.
disease. So the
Yeah.
presence of a germ can enter into a healthy person, and that healthy person will then become diseased only because of the presence of the germ. That's the idea. Um, that's total nonsense. There's not a paper in the world that's demonstrated that. Every time that someone gets sick and there is a germ present, there is a toxic internal terrain. That person does have a diseased environment prior to the presence of the germ, whether it is a parasite, whether it is a fungus, whether it is a germ. There's always going to be a toxic or a deficient internal terrain. Disease comes first, essentially. The role of these organisms are to actually clean up the environment. So they actually help bioremediation. These are terms that are used in literature if you want to look them up. Bioremediation, bioaccumulation. And what they mean is that they actually help detoxification and rejuvenation. They can help rebuild our tissues. They can help uh, take toxic material and convert it to something that's useful for the body to be able to use. So they can convert, like, take chromium, for example. Chromium can have different charges. If it's at +6, it's very toxic for the body, but if it's at +3, if it's reduced, the body can actually use it as a beneficial element. And so if there's too much chromium in your system, bacteria, fungus, parasites can actually accumulate it in their own tissues at a far higher concentration than our innate tissues can.
Hmm.
So they actually shield our bodies from toxicity by accumulating it in their tissues for it then to be excreted from the body. Our lymphatic systems still work the way we know they work. Even our immune system, semantically, it's completely incorrect, but it does work with our microbiological systems to be able to detoxify. It's more of a detoxification and rejuvenation system than, a defense mechanism of the body to protect ourselves from microbial terrorists. That idea is nonsense. So that was a big one for me, was understanding, the true workings of our biology, of how health and disease function, kind of from the infectious side of things, and obviously the bleeds into sort of the chronic side as well, but that's a little bit of a different discussion, I suppose. Very
Nice.
connected though.
Nice. So thank you for explaining that further. Okay, what's your second?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, genetics was kind of a big one for me. We've been
Okay,
talking
that's a
about genetics a
yeah.
lot. So again, microbiology, or no, I didn't study microbiology directly, but I took a few courses. Biochemistry and molecular biology. I think 75% of my classes were genomics. So again, very, very familiar with the entire genetic argument, and sort of accepting that we really have no idea what we're talking about when it comes to that. Uh, it
Yes.
was another big one. Now, there's lots of, and you'll go over my YouTube and you'll see videos that are like, dude, does DNA exist? And, does all this stuff exist? Um, and so again, we're kind of getting to the weeds of the argument in those videos. If you want to dive deep, I think they're phenomenal. I mean, they're asking really amazing questions.
Nice.
Um, there is very little that we can understand when it comes to our genetics and what our genetic potential means, and blaming disease on genetics is nonsense. Genetic determinism is nonsense. Does that mean that heredity is nonsense? No. Does that mean that I don't look like my dad and mom?
Nice.
No, that's not what this argument is about. There's certain things that are transferable from parents to children, but kind of getting more into the weeds of the scientific theory surrounding genomics and genomic theory in general. That was a big one. That was a big one for me, especially when it comes to like genetic testing, genetic diseases, even the Mendelian diseases don't seem to be directly caused by genetics. Very interesting discussion surrounding that. I have good videos on that too. But that was a big one. That was a big one. Genetics and germ theory. Those are
Okay.
two big ones.
Awesome. All right. So I think the conclusion of that too is question everything.
Yeah.
I One of the reasons I love doing the show is it keeps me well educated, I guess is the best way to say it, on like watching your show, watching others, and it just continues to lead me. Like I think this week there were two things that I was like, oh my God, I never like I think it was your show talking about cars, one of yours, that just made me realize how, when you grow up with them, they're just a part of your life. And just questioning them, questioning transportation, questioning, like suddenly I was like, why haven't I ever questioned this before? Because it just is. Okay, just crazy, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're not even going into dentistry. Okay. Oh, and I have another question for you. Okay, I am going to ask this one.
Please.
I,
I got
I
time. We're good.
Okay, well, I had a client, I had a guy on the podcast a while back who was a Scientologist. Okay, this was another thing, because on one show
Yeah.
I saw you
Interesting.
talk to someone about this, and in the West, the story out there is that Scientology is bad. People are crazy. And he gave me a completely different perspective on it that I was just like, wait a minute. Maybe the government and the powers that be want to suppress this because parts of it are good. Do you have a thought on that?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny, if people ask me this for some reason a lot. They ask me about Scientology. Um, so actually, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that I have a master's in counseling psychology, and I have a successful wilderness therapy practice here in Nova Scotia where I take people out and I take them out into nature and we do walk and talks, and it's
So
it's
wait, what are you
therapy.
doing about that right now? Because you're not supposed to do that.
Well, yeah, so yeah, we're
Oh,
not doing that right now because that's the kind of legal side of things. But that's my whole practice
so nice.
in person here. So I'm a licensed, counseling therapist. And so I'm trained in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and
Nice.
reprocessing, which is
Hmm.
a trauma healing modality where
Yep,
you
it's
move your
great.
eyes back and forth and, through certain prompts and exploration, you can heal trauma. Very powerful. I mean,
Hmm.
I've seen it work time and
Yep.
time again. There's a lot of truth to it. You know, the modality itself, if you boil down EMDR to like its essence, and what you're doing, what you're accomplishing, there are tons of trauma healing modalities. They all boil down to the same essence. So there's like MACE therapy, there's EMDR, there's brain spotting, there's uh, accelerated resolution therapy, ART. There are tons of different modalities. I'm blanking on a few different names here, but any trauma
There are a
healing
lot.
modality boils down to the same essence. And the closer you get to the perfect essence, the better your trauma healing modality is going to be. Now, I did have some interactions with people who are Scientologists. Just had a chat with them, through social media. The first thing that they always say to me is that Scientology has helped them heal their traumas and help
Yes.
them become better versions.
Yep.
And they showed me, what modalities they use. And again, it boils down to the same essence that all these other trauma healing modalities use. Um, Scientology as an organization, as an authority, as
No,
whatever. I don't believe in any of
buy into
that.
that. Right.
I don't believe in a central organized entity when it comes to a church or a religion, although I do love theology and the study of religious texts, but not necessarily the organization and the authority therein.
Hmm.
Um, Same goes for Scientology, same goes for government, same goes for the scientific establishment, same goes for absolutely everything. That's kind of my fundamental belief system, I suppose.
Yep.
But people go and they go into Scientology and they heal their traumas. And I don't know if people are being preyed upon in that sense. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. The people that I've talked to have had positive
Positive experiences.
interactions with it.
Yeah.
Is it different from like the Jehovah's Witnesses? Like, I don't know, like, because I know that they have a certain amount of healing when it comes to trauma. I know that a lot of, religions do. And, is it being misused and abused? I don't really have any arguments to say that that's necessarily true at this point. But what I do know is that for Scientology specifically, it seems as though people are going there with problems and they're being healed of those problems when it comes to maybe trauma or different things like that. And so that's probably why people love it, in my opinion, because they become better versions of themselves when they heal
Yeah.
themselves. I don't really know too much about it beyond that. But
Yeah.
it does seem like, from what I gather in my, opinion, it does seem like a valid way to heal trauma because it has the
Mhm.
same essence as all these other healing modalities out there.
Yeah. So same thing, question everything, especially if you've been told something your whole life. That's when you really question it.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you, in terms of dentistry, what is one key thing that you've garnered from that as well?
Dentistry seems to be like the most synthetic field of them all. Everything we want to do
Woo!
when it comes to dentistry is synthetic. The best thing is prevention,
Okay.
simply put.
Okay.
Um,
Beautiful.
and I mean, that's when it comes to health in general. Prevention is truly the way. What really opened my eyes to, dentistry was the dentist Weston A. Price, Dr. Weston A. Price. He was a phenomenal dentist. He studied indigenous populations around the entire world. He studied the
Ah,
Aborigines in Australia, the Inuits up north here in North America. He studied the Gaelics, the Swiss, the Tanzanians, the Hadza, Hunza tribes around the world. He was studied the Peruvians, little islands out in the middle of nowhere, and he looked at their diets
okay.
and he looked at their lifestyle habits and he compared those indigenous people living indigenous lifestyles to indigenous people who live near a railroad and who eat, sugar. And this was in the 30s, 1930s. So he compared indigenous people consuming indigenous lifestyle, indigenous people consuming a modern lifestyle. In the indigenous group, those individuals had no dental deformities, perfect facial structure, perfect facial development, and their cavity incidence might have been 1%. The highest that was seen was
Wow.
2%, and those were in the Gaelic and Swiss populations, and they ate a lot of grains.
Okay.
But still, we're only talking 2% of the entirety of all the teeth that he looked at, and he looked at thousands of teeth. 2% was the highest that he saw in populations. Compared to indigenous populations consuming modern diets, we're talking 30 to 50% of teeth had cavities and terrible dental formation. Their dental arches were pushed together, too small, crumpled teeth all together, obviously needed a lot of intervention, stuff like that. They had very poor dental formation. So that was kind of the fundamental observation, was that modern lifestyles create very poor facial development and cavities. So cavities can be reversed with consumption of the proper human diet, which is the natural human diet, which all you got to do is go look at what ancestors ate and look at what you can eat locally without going to the grocery store or eating what comes out of boxes. Um, and there's other ideas like mouth breathing is not necessarily the ideal way to breathe. You want to breathe nasally. You want your tongue to rest on the roof of your mouth. Breastfeeding is also very helpful for facial development, and there are bad habits that come, with soothing, like using soothers too long. All these things contribute. All these things kind of unnatural in their own ways, I suppose. Um, so prevention is key. What was shown with Weston A. Price was that the parents who ate a modern diet had children with poor dental formation.
Okay.
And if the children who had poor dental formation consumed an indigenous diet, their children would have perfect dental formation. So in one generation, a lot of his
Wow.
observations showed that you could switch
Rectify,
it just like
reverse.
that. Just like that. So, there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes, with having children,
Yeah.
and making sure that you have enough nutrients, eating a good diet, avoiding toxicities, etc. He observed a lot of other things like the indigenous people living an indigenous lifestyle had no infectious illness, had little to no illness in general, no injuries, nothing like that. Whereas the moderns, they had tuberculosis and they had all these different infectious illnesses. Again, kind of supporting the terrain idea rather than the germ
Hmm.
theory. Um, but yeah, when it comes to like dentistry nowadays, we use fluorides and root
Oh
canals,
gosh.
and fillings and amalgams and all these different things. Um, you know, Root canals are not ideal. You'd probably best to have them removed. Same with mercury and amalgams and different fillings and stuff like that. How to heal your teeth naturally. I just had a master class on this in my Beyond Terrain Academy. Um, Diet is number one. There are certain things that you can use, like, you know, ensuring that you have the right calcium phosphorus balance. A lot of primal people, there's a lot of pictures of people who have chipped their teeth, and
Yeah.
you could see a visible chip in their tooth. And they drank like 5 liters of raw milk a day for 2 years, and then their tooth like literally regrew back. It remineralized the enamel perfectly
Wow.
back to straight across, and they had pictures to prove it. This happens quite often, so strict diet can be helpful. Can be helpful. It is helpful. But yeah, the avoiding the like dentistry as much as you can, and even like the biological dentist. Is there a dentist out there that I would recommend? Not necessarily. I mean, it depends kind of what you're looking for. I've interviewed a dentist who works very closely with an osteopath. And he
Nice.
would be the only dentist in the world that I would probably ever recommend anyone to go see because he understands that doing dental work without ensuring that the cranium is properly flowing and moving and that the spine and the cranial sacral connection is good and that the energy flow of the body is good. He knows that any dental work is absolutely useless without considering the entirety of the body. So he works in the same room as an osteopath. They work with each other and give each other feedback based on the procedures that they're doing. They help work with individuals regain proper facial development and other things like that. So, yeah, I mean, osteopathy again I really love osteopathy. I think it's probably one of the best practices out there when it comes to body work. Um, Especially when it comes to dental problems. Because the dental, like, I mean, you look at the meridians of the teeth, they connect to every
Yeah.
part of the body. I mean, there's so much interconnectedness when it comes to the teeth. Even physically, when you look at the nervous system, each tooth is connected through the nervous system directly to the brain. I mean, and that connects to the rest of the body. And so there's so much important stuff when it comes to that. We could probably go do a whole hour on dentistry and how to heal your teeth naturally itself, but hopefully
Well,
that sums it up.
again, nothing is separate. I mean, it
Yeah.
isn't just, oh, I have this toothache, so that means it's just in my tooth. It applies to everything. All right.
Absolutely.
All right, you. In terms of the Just Be practice, knowing that you've given so much good information today, what would you like to do with that, knowing your background may come and what you do for a living may come into play? Yeah. What do you want to do? Just be
Yeah. So, I
practice.
mean, I kind of want to take like it might be a little bit of a different way that might be kind of counterintuitive a little bit to maybe some of the ideas that you've been proposed to before. I know there's always a huge focus on the internal, and kind of coming back to ourselves internally.
Yes.
Um, there's an immense amount of value when it comes to doing the internal work.
Mhm.
You know, Coming from the terrain paradigm, looking at the external world is often something that we ignore. So kind of a little simple practice of becoming a little bit more aware of the external world around us rather than kind of tuning in internally. But again, nothing's separate, right? So
Yep.
there's always like that coming back to the self, to the internal world to be able to look externally properly as well. Um, Yeah, so a little something like that. Like
Sounds
I
great.
don't really even have a name for this practice. I was kind of just thinking about this. I really love this portion of the show. I think it's phenomenal. So yeah, it's not necessarily something that has a name per se, but we're just gonna kind of come back to ourselves and look externally a little bit to see what's in our environment, what it kind of can tell us about our internal world too, right? Because
Mhm.
that's what the train understands best.
Okay.
Very good. We get ready to rock then?
Ready to rock. Let's
Good
do
to
it.
go?
Hmm.
Amazing. So we will start, as much as I was talking about the external world, we're going to come back to ourselves and just come back to ourselves for a moment here and just, take free breaths, tune in with that internal world and just breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, just settling into your environment. Hopefully you're in a comfortable space. If you listen to the podcast, you might be in the car, so it might not be the best practice to do in the car, but just coming back to yourself and maybe pulling over, getting on the ground. If you're in your bedroom or your kitchen or your living room can be a really helpful part of this. There's something that's said about interacting with the floor and the groundedness that we have, connecting with the physical ground itself. And so what we want to do is just when we're feeling ready, we can have a look around and just start tuning into the five senses around us. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the connection with our senses and maybe having a look and seeing five things that we can notice, just noticing them, taking them in, moving into four things that we can feel around us, that we can touch. Coffee table in front of me, sweater around my feet because it's so cold, different things like that. And tuning into our breath again, seeing if there's anything around that we can hear. Can hear some people upstairs, hear some birds outside, little hum of my laptop in front of me. Take a breath in, notice anything that we can smell. I can kind of smell the room around me as well. There's a certain distinct smell that it has. And then anything that we can taste, and I can taste my lunch that I had before coming on to the podcast here today. And so tuning in with these five senses, and then let's go through them again. We've tuned in, and now let's hone in on our sight and we understand the root causes of things that may be hindering us, hindering our progress and our growth forward. And maybe we can look around and see five things. I'm in my bedroom right now. I have a little office in the corner, looking at five things right now in my bedroom that might be hindering my ability to grow and become the best version of myself physically, mentally, spiritually. And so I'm sitting on the ground here, and one of the things that I notice is there's a little bit of dust on the ground, and I could probably sweep my floor and clean it up. And I'm looking at a few clothes that need to be put away. Part of my bed isn't perfectly made. So there's a lot of weight that carries. And then looking in and wondering, what does that mean? Why did I put that off? Did I notice that initially? Did I miss that? Why did I not notice that? Or why did I not put these clothes away when they were ready? And what's kept me from even sweeping the floor? Why have I put that off? How's that going to affect me very physically, very spiritually, psychologically as well? So just tuning into these things that are around and even something so simple as now looking at what we can feel. And so sitting on a pillow on the floor right now, and I think it's made out of polyester, right? And so again, it's one of these things that I might be able to improve in my external terrain that's going to influence my internal terrain. Same can be done with what we notice with our smell, you know, the air quality of the room that we're in. Should we open a window? I shut my windows for the podcast here, but what if I had a little more fresh air in this room? What would that smell like? How would that impact me? What role is this stagnation in the air in my bedroom right now going to play in my life? Is there any stagnation in my life in general? What's going to happen if I open those windows and let that stagnation go? What am I holding on to in this moment right now? And so what I love so much about connecting with the external world is that it can tell us a lot about our internal world. When I mentioned earlier about the interactions that I had during the lockdowns and the negative ones that I had initially, there was a lot of hatred and resentment in my heart, which led to my own escalation of the interactions that I had. So looking at the interactions that we have, are they positive? Are they light? Are they happy? Are you bringing more good in the world with each interaction that you have? And looking externally there, those are the areas that I look for to see a little bit more about my internal world. There's like a map outside of us, a mirror outside of us that reflects our internal terrain. So, and it's sort of a paradox a little bit. Our internal terrain quite literally creates our external one, and vice versa too. So, yeah, that's something I just like to do every once in a while, is just kind of tune in with my external world and just see how that's influencing my internal terrain. So I kind of tried to share a little bit about what was going on. Hopefully, the listener helped.
I love that. And I always like to give something personal from that. The chair
Yeah.
that I sit on has never been quite comfortable. So I
Yeah.
sat here and just felt it. And I'm like, why don't I get something else? Well, it kind of, this dialogue, well, it matches the table that it's on, but it's really uncomfortable. And I sit here and do these podcasts. I'm sitting on something that doesn't feel all that good. So yeah, thank you for that, Liev.
That's cool. I like that.
Appreciate you making me be more conscious of that uncomfortability. Hey, thank you so much for sharing yourself on the show. You are wise, I would say, beyond your biological years. Yeah, you're a very old soul. Has anyone ever told you that?
Yeah, I heard that a couple times before.
Oh, yeah. And it's spiritually, it's true. Okay, I'll go ahead and give you this. I'm looking at you right now,
Please.
and there's your form here, and then there's another form. I mean, there are so many forms around you, and they are male, female, like there is such a combination of experience that you've had that is leading you here to this moment. And I term this moment the great awakening, that you are also pivotal in sharing your voice, and specifically being the age that you are too, because on the show, everything you have such a oh, what's the word I'm looking for too? Credibility, such a credibility in the way you express things. So yeah, you are really important in this movement, in this growth, in this energy enhancement. So keep it up, please. And thank you for coming and sharing yourself with me today. Okay, one thing before we leave. Next week, because my show is weekly, we I every show is fabulous, and I love the people that come on, but this is kind of a split from what I usually do. It's going to be very financially based, but part of it is because I recently discovered I was involved in a gold IRA scam. So the discernment, and the folks that are coming on the show, to figure out who you trust financially and what words to listen to and who knows what's going on. Not to say that they know everything that's going on, but I have been led to them. They have been helping me so much. And I'm not promoting their company per se, but them and their knowledge, and it feels really important and really good. So stay tuned for that. Hey, you have a great day. Stay with me for a moment when I stop recording.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
everybody, thank you so much, and stay tuned. This is such good stuff. All right, see you later. Say
Thank you.
bye.
See you guys.
Y'all, find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, True Social, as well as Rumble, BitChute, YouTube, plus a plethora of other audio directories like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So subscribe, do it all. See ya.